We talk about equality in pay, politics and power. But what about equality in pain? From periods to perimenopause, women's bodies are still treated like medical mysteries. The overwhelming majority of medical research is still carried out on men because women are seen as too complicated to study. Our hormones fluctuate, our cycles vary, so instead of designing research around us, the system excludes us. Sometimes it feels like women's pain has to reach crisis point before it's treated seriously. Why is that still happening in 2025? Welcome to the DemocraTEA podcast, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics. My name is Anum. At 28, I became one of the youngest members of Parliament elected to Westminster. From the Houses of Parliament to protests on the streets, I've seen up close how power works and how often it doesn't. That's why I started this podcast. It's unfiltered, unapologetic and disruptive. We go behind the headlines and behind the sound bites to challenge the status quo. I'm not a journalist and this isn't just another political podcast. This is about the conversations that impact all of us. The conversations that don't always make the headlines, but shape how we live, work and show up in the world. I will talk about politics. We'll also look at power, identity, faith, equality and everything in between. Real stories, real people, real talk. Today I'm sitting down with Dr Farah Ahmed, a GP specialising in women's health, to ask, why are women still fighting to be taken seriously in healthcare? What will it take to close the gender health gap for good? And how do we make sure no woman is left behind in the process? And before we dive in, this is our very first season, so your support means the world. After you've listened, I'd love to know what you think. Is women's health taken seriously? And do you know what you should be doing to help your body through periods and menopause? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so we can keep inviting guests to spill the tea on people, power and politics. So Farah, I had 4 hours of sleep last night. I'm incredibly tired, so I've got a big cup of coffee that's in my cup. How about yourself? What are you drinking today?
Do you know what? I keep it simple. I have a builder's tea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that milk and 2 sugars? No.
No.
You said you don't have any sugar.
No sugar, just milk and a tea
Nice
bag.
nice and healthy.
Oh, keeping it simple.
So Dr Farah, you are a women's health GP.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a GP, you've went through all the training, but you've specifically specialised in women's health. You look at menopause, family planning, periods.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that also important to you?
It's important for a number of reasons. I mean, it depends how far we want to go back. But initially, it all kind of started when I was about 11, and my mother had some gynecological issues. We were brought up in Wales, very kind of white. We were one of very few ethnic minority families. And her gynecologist was a male doctor. And I remember he was actually very lovely. But obviously, as a South Asian woman, as a Muslim woman, she found that quite difficult just going to see him. And although she spoke English, when it came to the consultation, she would hesitate a little bit and feel a bit anxious. So she would take me along with her and I would be there more just hold her hand and help with translation. And it was a bit strange being in that situation because I had this person that resembled my head teacher, and then I would have to speak to him about my mum's bleeding and use words like vagina, which as an 11-year-old was a bit awkward. And I just remember thinking, gosh, I found that quite difficult. My mother found it difficult. He probably found it quite difficult as well. And it's probably a bit inappropriate. And it just made me think, gosh, I never want another woon to feel like the way my mother did. And I never want another child to kind of be in the position that I was put in. So I've always been interested in women's health. And I did have ambitions to be a gynecologist. But my first set of nights kind of put me off. And as much as I loved the specialty, I just felt that it just wasn't conducive to the way I wanted to live my life. But I have a great, huge amount of respect for all my gynecology colleagues. But this is a nice balance of life and what I really believe in.
Fast forward, do you think life has changed or that scenario has changed? Or are there still young girls like Farah growing up in Wales who are having to go to medical appointments with their mothers and translate these types of words?
Yes, so I do see that still quite a lot. I had a lady in the other day, actually. She brought in her 8-year-old son, God bless him. She's from the Somalian community, who she said would speak on her behalf. And I said, no, there's no need for that. I can get a translator. We had a telephone translator dialed in with the little boy. You know, we just kind of plugged him into his phone so that he was kind of kept busy, but still very much in the room, but not really privy to our conversation. And I just thought, this is not the place all the time. It's not fair on the mum. It's not fair on the child, because he's not really going to be able to translate accurately the information that I need to know. So one thing I would say to lots of women is that if language is a barrier, there are translation services available to all of your hospital appointments, your GP appointments.
Is that something that's well known as a fact?
No, it's not well known at all. It's standard practice, so it is available. You may have to ask for it, but it's available. And I find a lot of women that come in aren't aware of that, so they'll often bring in relatives or friends. And then even if they're bringing in their friend and they want to talk about, you know, their mental health, for instance, there are things that they may not want their friends to know. They may not feel comfortable divulging. So you only really know half the situation. So I always use a translation service where I can, if I'm not able to conduct the consultation in Urdu or Hindi myself.
Does this not speak to a wider problem or a wider issue of women just spinning so many plates? They've got household responsibilities, especially if you look at ethnic minority women who disproportionately take on a larger proportion of housecare or household responsibilities. They're juggling that, they're juggling childcare. In some instances, they're working. They have their own mental health issues. We all are impacted by mental health at some point in our life. Surely this is just leading to burnout for these women. Yeah,
I think we kind of shot ourselves in the foot when we wanted, you know, equality, but we absolutely do not have equality. What we have exactly is burnout, and we're paying for all of those things through our health, where we're kind of smashing it in our careers, but then we're also in charge of the dinners and the laundries and the school pickups, drop-offs, birthday parties, all of that. So we've taken on a lot, and it's what, you know, we often refer to as life laundry or the invisible load. But also with my generation of women, so women that kind of in their 40s and 50s, I kind of feel we're the sandwich generation and the forgotten generation, which not many people talk about, where not only do we have children who are still dependent on us, but we also have aging parents as well. And we're often at this stage of life kind of at the peak of our careers, so there's all of that to deal with. And it is leading to burnout, and it's just a case of having to stop, take stock of the situation, and just use a lot of allies and support services around you.
Is one of the wider issues not that when we talk about women facing burnout, more often than not, they're told, go have a bubble bath, have a nice night out, or just go to sleep earlier. But that doesn't actually change the structural barriers that are in place, or even the attitude of the health service towards women going through burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, I honestly can't remember the last time I had a bubble bath. It was probably like in pre-COVID times, if that. And then I probably had a child knocking on the door saying, Mummy, how long will you be? And also, even if you do have time for a bubble bath, that's not going to fix the long-term issue.
Exactly.
But I think workplaces, and I don't know if you've noticed this with your line of work, I think they are getting much better at supporting their women through all stages of life, so with the menstrual health, with maternity, with menopause. There's still a lot to be done, but I do think things are better now than they say were 10 years ago. But then again, there's still, you know, could be much, much better.
Do you think healthcare system sees burnout for women as a real issue?
I think we're great at recognising mental health, and I guess burnout is part of that. But labelling burnout as a separate entity to mental health is not really being recognised. And I think women also are not very good at recognising when they're burning out. It's only when they hit rock bottom, when their marriages have gone to pot, when their work is really suffering, when, you know, their other relationships and the wider ripple effect has come into play, is the point where they kind of think, oh gosh, you know, I really need to seek help here, when really it should have been much, much sooner to prevent it to get to that stage. But, you know, we often have blinkers on, we're tunnel visioned, and it's difficult to recognise that.
As a GP that specialises in women's health, what are the kind of top 3 things you would say to them to do if they're recognising that they're heading towards burnout?
I think lots of things to prioritise, first of all. And the one, in fact, it's not even three things, just one thing I often say to women.
Okay.
We have to practice being selfish. And that's something we're really not good at. Yeah. And there's so many negative connotations, attached to the word selfish. But being selfish is all about self-preservation, because often women, especially in South Asian communities, but actually I'd argue in all communities, are kind of central to your family life, to work life as well. So if you fall down, it's going to have such a ripple effect. So it's in your husband's interest, your children's interest, your boss's interest, your colleagues' interest to support you and ensure that you're, managing surviving at optimum level. In fact, not surviving, but thriving, because so many things depend on you.
Is that not just the whole issue with the women's healthcare system, though? It's about surviving, not thriving.
Yes, it is. It is, Daddy. Lots of work to be done, but we're kind of, we're getting there slowly but surely.
Part of that burnout comes from challenges that are unique to women. So, for example, we menstruate, we have periods, and it's not just that for a week in a month you're bleeding. It's the whole host of issues that are associated with that. It's back pain, it's period cramps, it's feeling weak, it's feeling really, really lethargic. Do you feel like periods are something that are now more commonly spoken about, or is it still a taboo subject?
We are getting better. I mean, if you look at the advertising around period products, before they would be referred to as sanitary products or menstrual hygiene products, as if periods are something dirty, but actually they're very natural. So the terminology has changed, and language, of course, matters. But also, I don't know if you're old enough to remember when they would have adverts for period pads, they would use this bright blue water to illustrate how absorbent the pad was. But now you probably don't remember, but this is what I remember growing up. But now we have, it's not actual blood, but liquid that actually looks like blood, just to help normalise it, that this is what actually happens. But I do think we're getting better at recognising how menstruation affects women through all stages of life. And also, you mentioned that, we kind of bleed every week. And an interesting fact is, if we typically start your period at 11 and go through menopause typically about 51, but it's actually earlier for Pakistani and Indian women, about 45. But let's say, for argument's sake, that's 40 years of your life you will spend menstruating. Of that 40 years, you will spend 10 years bleeding through your vagina.
No way.
Think about 10 years every day.
That's a full decade.
Exactly, which is absurd. And I just think, gosh, if a man bled for 10 years through his penis, we would not be having this conversation. We would not need this podcast. It would be built into government policies and workplace policies. But the fact that we just do that and we just soldier on. And that's assuming that women don't have other conditions like fibroids or endometriosis or PMS or any of that. That's just women that just have regular periods but just crack on.
Do you feel like we're at a stage now within the South Asian culture, because we're both of Pakistani ethnicity and heritage, do we feel like our culture now will speak about periods, we'll speak about the pain associated with periods, we'll speak about PCOS, about endometriosis, about all these different healthcare issues that are associated with being a woman? Yeah,
we're definitely getting much better at it. And I work a lot with South Asian women. There's a brilliant organisation I work with called Sisters, CYSTER, like ovarian cyst, and they do lots of work in outreach work with grassroots organisations just to help normalise the stigma surrounding menstrual health, maternal health, mental health and menopause health as well. We're doing an event next month on World Menopause Day. It's called Normalised and Menopausal. And we've got, I think, 100 delegates attending from all walks of life. And this, I don't think this would be possible 5 years ago, but definitely things are definitely changing. Our whole panel are women representative of all ethnic minorities as well. And I think it's important to have that lived experience, to see women that look like you, that sound like you, have that same lived experience, to represent health services and what's available out there.
You're a woman, you go through your periods throughout your whole life. I think on average you start your periods at around age 11. You then become an adult and you hit perimenopause and then menopause. What do those two terms mean?
That's a great question. They are real buzzwords at the moment and we all kind of say them, but I think, you're right, a lot of people don't know what they mean. So perimenopause is the build up to the menopause. So if you kind of think from your first period up until your, the middle of your, or towards the end of your reproductive cycle. So if we say from 11 to about 35, providing there's no PCOS or endometriosis or anything like that, women kind of have nice fluctuations in the hormones' regular menstrual cycles. But from about 35 onwards, the hormones are just doing their own thing. They're all over the place. And that's the period that we call the perimenopause, the lead up to the menopause. And then we have the menopause, which it's a bit of a funny one because it's a diagnosis that we make looking back in time. So it's 12 months after your last period. But of course, you're not going to know which period is your last period until you don't have any more bleeding for 12 months. So that's your menopause, and that's a one-day event. And then after that is your postmenopausal stage, which is really important because if you're menopausal, if you hit menopause kind of in your late 40s, and the average life expectancy for women now is about 83, that's a good 30 to 35 years of your life that you're going to spend in the postmenopausal era. So it's really important to make sure, you're paying attention to your cardiovascular health, your bone health, your muscles, your gut health, all sorts of things to ensure that not only do you have a longer lifespan, but a greater health span as well, because women are spending more of those years in ill health rather than just smashing it and get back to that word, thriving.
Can we just take a step back for a minute? You hit your perimenopause when you're 35 on average.
So menopause for South Asian women is about 46, 47 for white women.
That's before the national average for white women.
Yes, so that national average is about 51 for white women.
Why is there a difference?
Honestly, we still don't know. The jury is out on that.
Oh,
and the
wow.
problem is there's very little research being done looking at that. We know, looking at multiple studies, that that's when it occurs. But why it occurs, we're still, trying to kind of make sense of that. So assuming that, if South Asian women hit menopause at 46 to 47 and perimenopause can start anything from 5 to 8 years earlier, then kind of towards your late 30s, South Asian women could be hitting perimenopause.
I'm 33 years old.
Oh, you've got time. You've got
Doesn't
time.
feel like it. If we have a woman in our life who's going through the menopause, we've all heard about the concerns around hot flushes, just constantly being tired. I mean, I've got older women in my family, so I've heard and experienced and seen it all. I feel like actually at times I've lived through the menopause with them. Yeah. But if we take that a step back, and if the perimenopause hits you in your late 30s, does that present itself with different symptoms?
So perimenopausal symptoms, there's thought to be more than 90 different symptoms that could be attributed.
Over 90?
Yes, over 90. The two that everyone talks about is the hot flushes and the night sweats. However, I very rarely, and I work in a menopause clinic, have women coming in saying, "Oh, doctor, I've had 3 months of hot flushes and night sweats. I think I'm perimenopausal." If it was that straightforward. It's usually a plethora of symptoms, and it's usually non-specific vague symptoms as well. So, I'm feeling a bit tired, feeling a bit fed up. My husband thinks I'm mad. My children thinks I'm mad. Do I have dementia? Not interested in intimacy with my husband anymore. It's not that I like him. I still love him very much, but I just don't want him anywhere near me. So it's lots and lots of symptoms, and it's usually if say a woman was 37, so kind of the younger end of the spectrum, I would do some baseline blood tests to make sure, could it be iron deficiency that's contributing to her tiredness? Is there a thyroid dysfunction that's contributing to her irregular periods? But symptoms coupled with a 3 to 4 months history of having irregular periods is usually the basis of diagnosis. But like I said, in younger women, certainly women that are under 45, I would like to do some blood tests to make sure we're not missing anything. But in women over 45, we pretty much go by symptoms because at that stage it probably is perimenopause.
But that must be really difficult to diagnose, because if you're a South Asian woman, we all know that we're more likely to have iron deficiencies, we are more likely to have vitamin D deficiencies. All this feels very similar symptoms to perimenopause.
It does, however, with say vitamin D deficiency and iron deficiency, I wouldn't expect you to have all the other symptoms with perimenopause. I wouldn't expect that to affect your menstrual cycles. I wouldn't expect that to present with hot flushes, night sweats, dryness down below, cognitive dysfunction as well, so forgetfulness, as women say, brain fog is a big thing. So with iron deficiency, women often present with just feeling tired all the time despite having 8 to 10 hours of sleep, which you haven't, by the way. But that sort of thing. So the symptomology is really important. So it's really important to have quite a thorough, clear history. and then couple that with blood tests. 'Cause we're not treating the blood test, we're treating the person. And sometimes you can have both. You can be iron deficient and perimenopausal and vitamin D deficient, which is actually very, very common in South Asian women.
I knew none of this about the perimenopause. Do you think that's normal for most people?
It is normal for most people. I guess if you go looking for it, then,
Yeah.
you know, the algorithms on your social media will flood you with that kind of stuff. But I would say just be careful where you get your information from.
Of course.
If you are going to follow, you know, influencers, just check their credentials. Are they doctors? Are they health professionals? But also there's lots of websites where you can get information as well. So things like Rock My Menopause, Menopause Matters, and Women's Health Concern. They are 3 websites recognised by the British Menopause Society and also by the by NICE, the National Institute of Clinical and Healthcare Excellence, that signpost patients to these websites. So they're a great resource of information. And also speak to your GPs as well. Ask. One tip, I would say, find out who the women's health specialist is within your GP surgery. And normally there will always be one person that has a special interest in women's health. Go and see them and speak to them about it. But I would say do your research and your homework before you go to that appointment, just to make it more meaningful, because you've only got a 10-minute window. So you need to get through stuff quite quickly, unfortunately.
You said something really interesting there. You spoke about being really careful from where you get your information from. I'm chronically online, Dr. Farah.
Yeah.
I'm constantly scrolling TikTok, Instagram,
Yeah.
and you do see people posing as healthcare specialists, but they're not doctors. They've not gone through 5 or 6 years of medical school. They've not done their foundation 1 in year 2. They've not done their specialism training. They might be a healthcare professional, but they don't have that level of expertise. Actually, is that something that concerns you, that there are people online pretending to give out healthcare advice that they're not really equipped to do?
Yeah, and you see that a lot in all spaces, not just healthcare. In healthcare, it's particularly concerning because it's potentially dangerous. But then, you know, you're a politician, I don't want to get too political, but then you have, you know, the president of the free world across the pond giving out quite dubious healthcare advice. You mentioned the whole paracetamol in pregnancy.
Tylenol in pregnancy.
Yes.
So dangerous.
Exactly. And it's based on nothing, just, plucked out of the air. And I don't know if you remember during COVID times, he was talking about, you know, injecting bleach and stuff like that, where I think 2 people did and they subsequently died. So we have to be really careful. And I don't know what the big social media giants are doing to counteract that, but I would say, or whilst they're working on it, what I would say to anyone that does use social media is just be quite vigorous in checking the credentials of that person. And if there's anyone that's worth their salt, I put my credentials in my bio, so it's very clear for people to see who I am, what I've done.
About.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not something that I put just to like, hey, look at me with all these letters up from my notes. It's just to give reassurance to people that actually I have done additional qualifications and I do probably know a bit more than the average person.
You've scared me a little bit, Dr. Farah.
Okay.
I'm 33. You're saying that perimenopause starts in the late 30s. Can you tell I'm just not going to get this out of my mind?
Yeah.
If I am going to be looking after my body, because naturally that's something, inshallah, if I have that long a life, that I hit the perimenopause stage, are there any particular types of food that I should be eating to help myself and help my body?
Yeah. Firstly, please don't worry. Okay, really, don't panic. And it's great you're asking all the right questions. It doesn't mean you will enter perimenopause. I'm just saying, in theory, you could.
You may.
But in terms of diet and nutrition, so there's no specific hormonal diet or menopause diet or anything like that. And I know there's a lot of meno washing. I don't know if you've been to the supermarkets and in certain chemists and things. There's so many products being branded as, you know, targeted towards menopausal women. I mean, I've seen shampoos and conditioners and tea bags and all sorts. I would say stay away from those type of things and follow a gut-friendly diet. So by that I mean eat things that avoid anything that comes out of a packet, basically. That's the easiest way to say it. So fresh fruit and vegetables should be the bulk of your diet. Oily fish as well, really, really important. As many greens as you can get into your diets, nuts and seeds, plenty of water, herbal teas, all of that sort of stuff. Try and cook from scratch as much as possible. I'm a working mum. I've got 3 kids. My husband travels a lot. I know it's hard, but the freezer is my best friend. I batch cook on weekends and whenever I can, just to make the week easier for me, just to ensure that we are having home cooked meals. And if they come out the freezer, it's okay, but that's probably better than some convenience foods.
And if you're a South Asian woman, is there anything in particular you should be thinking about eating in the run up to the perimenopause?
So one thing I wouldn't say about eating, but one thing we need to be aware of is our bone health. So
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we kind of assume every South Asian woman and every woman from the Black community are vitamin D deficient, and that's because of the colour of our skin. We live in the northern hemisphere. We tend to cover up a bit more as well. So even when we are out in the sun, we're not exposing our skin to the sun. So vitamin D is a must. So you do need to supplement that, especially during the winter months, to help protect your bones. The other thing I would say, not quite diet and nutrition, but in terms of what you can do for your body, is if you don't have time to run a 5K, that's okay. Prioritize resistance training and weights. Just start lifting heavy things. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're shopping. I don't care if you're a 3-year-old child. Just anything where you're really stimulating your muscles, working your muscles and bones to build up that strength. Because if you don't, you will run into problems like osteopenia, which is bone thinning, and osteoporosis, which is the big sister of osteopenia, so even worse, bone thinning. And 50% of women, by the time they get to 80, will sustain a fracture if they've not taken HRT or done anything to protect their bones. And of that fracture, you kind of think, oh, fracture, broken bone, no big deal. But in that age group, those fractures actually lead to death. They do kill women because they're so brutal. So I think one thing I would say is just protect your bones.
I would never have known that.
Well, now you do.
And now I do. I'm going to go back home and do resistance training.
Yes, please do. Like I said, even if you don't have time to do the cardio, we'll forgive that. You're going to be doing the steps anyway, wherever you go. But yeah, resistance training, weight training is a must. Non-negotiable.
And you're saying that's in the run up to perimenopause, but actually I assume that's also throughout your life.
Throughout your life, just make it as part of your habit in the same way that you pray or brush your teeth or whatever. Just, bang out some squats. And you don't need to invest in expensive equipment like kettlebells and dumbbells. Just using weighted, just your own body weight is enough. And there's lots of great personal trainers on Instagram and things like that do, a quick 5-minute program. But it's just about consistency.
So I feel like I'm going to be on the phone to my aunties now after this.
Yes.
Calling them and saying, see when you're watching your Pakistani dramas like Munat Murad or whatever the new one is now, make sure you get a couple of cans of beans or something and let's essentially do the weights.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just about habit stacking. So, I know as women we are time poor, but if you do have time to, watch something, as you're watching, just cans of beans or bags of flour or bags of rice or whatever, and just start, utilising those muscles. Just do it safely. Make sure you do your warm-ups and your stretches and all of that. But you can just stack it onto something that you're already doing.
Why is that so important?
So that's important for 2 reasons. One, to increase your muscle mass, because as you get older, especially after menopause, you will develop what we call sarcopenia, which is a medical term to say loss of muscle mass. And the other thing is to help your bones to physically make them much stronger as well. And alongside calcium, vitamin D, resistance training, you're onto a winner.
That's really interesting. And so then we fast forward after perimenopause, women then hit the menopause. What actually is the menopause? What is happening to a woman's body?
So you have 2 hormones released by the ovaries, estrogen and progesterone, and they're kind of released in a cyclical manner during your menstrual cycles. But during the perimenopause, they're just not really talking to one another, just kind of dancing to their own rhythm, and that's how the symptoms manifest. And then during menopause, those 2 hormones decline quite steeply, just down to almost just above a baseline level. And it's that reduction and decline in the hormones that leads to menopausal symptoms, so like vaginal dryness, also reduction in your bone health, reduction in your increase in your cardiovascular risk. So that's essentially what menopause is, and it's defined, like I said, by 12 months after your final period of having no bleeding whatsoever.
I've heard of women who are going through the menopause, specifically South Asian women, who are told by their GPs to take estrogen as a pessary. Is that something that is really important for them? So with HRT, it comes in various preparations. The safest, so it does come in a tablet, but the safest way to take it is through the skin. So that can be through a patch, through a gel, through a spray, and it's just a case of what works for you. Sometimes a gel may suit you, but it may
not suit your neighbour. So that's how we tend to give estrogen through the skin. And then progesterone, because you need to take both hormones. But you're right. So progesterone can be taken, again, it can be taken as a patch, it can be taken as a tablet, or it can be taken as a pessary, or even the coil, the Mirena coil, which has progesterone. So various forms. And sometimes there's a bit of trial and error to see what works for you.
There's a lot of conversation around HRT, whether or not it should be taken. I think there's reports that it leads to breast cancer. Do you find that South Asian women are less likely to take HRT because of these concerns?
I don't think it's only because of breast cancer. I think South Asian women are naturally just a bit suspicious about medication. Not so much about the diabetic medication or the blood pressure medication, which they're actually very good at, very compliant. But I think anything that involves hormones, and not just South Asian women, I think all women. In fact, let me ask you this. Of all the women that are eligible for HRT, so perimenopause or menopausal women, as a percentage, what percentage do you think women in the UK take it?
Well, that's a really good question. I would guess around 50% of women take HRT.
It's 14%.
14%?
14% in white women.
Okay.
And 5% in South Asian women.
Wow.
Yes.
I am shook by that stat.
Yeah, it's
I wouldn't have
shocking.
thought it was that low.
And in the UK, we're actually ahead of our European colleagues. So in Italy, it's even worse. So it's not just something that's unique to South Asians, but across all women, they're just a bit anti-hormones, anti-birth control pill, all sorts of things.
But why? Because like you just said, they're happy to take medication for their diabetes. They're happy to take medication for their cholesterol. They're happy to take medication for blood pressure.
Yes.
When it comes to hormone medication, there's resistance.
Yes.
Why is that?
I think there's a lot of stigma attached to taking hormones, and there were concerns, legitimate concerns about breast cancer. There was a study that was published 20 years ago which linked breast cancer to HRT use. That was widely debunked, has been widely debunked since then, in the same way that MMR was linked to autism, again, widely debunked. But unfortunately, mud sticks, and it's been really hard work to try and undo some of the stuff that came out of that. But what I can tell you is that if we had 1,000 women not on any HRT, over the course of 12 months, 23 of them would develop breast cancer. That's just the background risk. 23 would develop breast cancer. Add in HRT, that number jumps up to 27, which isn't that much more.
Not a significant number.
No, but what the interesting thing is, if we add in something like obesity, so a BMI over 30, your risk of breast cancer doubles. Yet no one is saying you need to lose weight because your risk of breast cancer is doubled. No one brands it that way. It's all about, diabetic risk, cardiovascular, but also we need to factor in breast cancer risk. And the reason I mention that a lot when I'm giving my talks is just to contextualize that actually you're not worried about your obesity causing breast cancer, yet you're worried about these hormones. And these hormones will actually offer cardiovascular protection and bone protection, and also let you feel a bit more like yourself and improve your relationship and just how you feel about yourself as well.
So the Auntie Aji should lay off the gulab jamun.
I would say everything in moderation. I would never deny an auntie of gulab jamun, but just, everything in moderation.
I feel like when we're talking about the risks associated with HRT, or the perceived risks associated with HRT, actually it speaks to a wider issue. Whether it's HRT, whether it's medication, or even whether it's a smear test, it just feels like women are resistant at times to really consider their hormones and what's happening in the inside.
Yeah.
They're happy to take the diabetic medication.
Yes.
Happy to take medication around cholesterol. But when it comes to smear tests, again, there's that resistance.
There is that resistance. And there's also this misconception that, with South Asian culture, if you're a virgin, then, you're not going to get cervical cancer, whereas in theory you possibly could. And my best friend happens to be the North West London Cancer Lead. So we have a lot of conversations because she does a lot of work within marginalised groups to increase the uptake of the mammogram, smear tests, and also the bowel cancer screening, because we know that for some South Asian communities, uptake is less than 50% when it comes to cervical screening, mammograms, and fit tests. But the interesting thing is with cancers is that South Asians are just kind of lumped into this one homogenous group. But if we look at the subsects, actually Indian women are much, much better at attending their screenings and engaging with those programs than the Bangladeshi and Pakistani women, who are much, much worse. And there's also a difference of like 60% uptake for Indian women for breast cancer, for mammograms, for instance. But that number falls to about 40% for Bangladeshi and Pakistani women. So still lots and lots of work to do in that area.
If we actually take a step back, what is a smear test and what is a mammogram?
A mammogram is an X-ray of your breast tissue. It takes about 20 minutes. You just go along. You can ask for a female technician. So if you feel uncomfortable with a male being in the room, that's absolutely fine. They get it. Often there are lots of female technicians around for that purpose. But if you happen to have a male technician who is actually they're very good at their job, but if you feel uncomfortable, you can ask. So that's something that's really important because that's often a barrier.
And is there an age range for that, or is anyone invited to come take a mammogram?
So mammograms, you're invited from the age of 50 onwards. However, if you do have a strong family history of breast cancer, so several first-degree relatives like mums, aunties, cousins, siblings, then you will be invited earlier and your GP will be able to guide you on that. But typically it's like 50 onwards.
And how about smear tests?
So smear tests are from 25 onwards, and they're typically every 3 years. And again, uptake is shamefully low. But with both of those cancers, although overall South Asian women have less incidence of breast cancer and cervical cancer, the problem is that when they are diagnosed, it's often at a much later stage, and so their outcomes are worse. And these are cancers that people tend to live with now than die from, because we have, advances in medical care and things like that. So it's something that they definitely should engage with, because once caught early, there's lots we can do about it.
Why do you think there is such a low uptake?
Again, I just don't think women understand what they involve. I don't think they understand the implications of not attending those smears. And so we do need to do more work educating them. And I think a lot of that needs to start in schools and also within the home as well. So there's lots of great work being done by various organisations. I'm doing a webinar in a couple of weeks with the Eve Appeal that do a lot of work with gynecological cancers. And that's with a South Asian cohort up in Lancashire. So there's lots of organisations doing lots of great work around it. Things are improving, but probably a bit slowly.
What are the major issues that impact South Asian women's health?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, it's all the usual things, but South Asian women in particular, we are more at risk of diabetes. I mean, so much so that our parameter that we use to measure diabetes is lower for South Asian women than it would be for a Caucasian woman. So to give you an example, there's a blood test called the HbA1c. So it's a blood test that we use to help us diagnose diabetes. And the threshold is actually lower for South Asian women, for South Asian people, because we know more of them are likely to be affected by diabetes, and also in a different way. Often they tend to present with worse outcomes, but also cardiovascular risk as well is much higher in South Asian populations, high cholesterol as well. Weight is another thing. We tend to hold a lot of our weight in our abdominal region, which is more unhealthy than if it was more evenly spread out.
Why do we not talk about obesity as an issue?
I think
you alluded to this earlier.
Yeah, obesity is a funny one. I think it's a bit of a loaded term. Some people find it quite triggering. Some people find it offensive. It's not a term that, even though it's a medical term, that I really use. When I start women on HRT and the contraceptive pill, we need to record their blood pressure and their BMI. And so I do that, and then I say to them, if I can see that their BMI is over a certain threshold, I just say, would you like to discuss diet and lifestyle, and do you have any concerns about your weight? Just to see what their perception is, because I think that's a really important conversation to have, because some of them are just not ready to have those conversations, and it can be quite... It can be very traumatic for them to speak about that, because often, it brings up all sorts of things from their past. So I just try and gauge where they're at with that, and then try and bring it up again the next time, because it's important. We can't ignore it, and it's all part of their treatments.
Does the South Asian lifestyle lead to obesity? Is it our diet?
Our diet is improving. Things like we would have like double carbs. So you'd have your rice and potatoes, for instance. There's no need for anyone to have
Three rotiyan with your salad.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I've always ate my salad and my dal with a spoon, so I kind of have it like a stew or a soup, which my mum thinks is quite novel, but I just think it's a much healthier way of still enjoying the food, but just making it a bit healthier. And similarly, lots of adaptations that you can make as well with your rotiyan. You know, use wholemeal flour, for instance, instead of like white flour. With rice, again, brown rice instead of white rice. When I make things like keema, I use a third meat and a third mixed beans and kind of blend it all together. And my husband, my children can't really tell what's in it. It all just looks like meat, but also that's great for their gut health, and it's quite bulky and filling as well. So lots of adaptations that you can make. But yeah, diet does play a part, but lots of tweaks that you can add in.
What advice could we give to women in order to help make those changes to their lifestyle?
So women are often in charge of all the meals in the house.
Of course they are.
Yes, and they're in charge of the supermarket shopping as well. So your house, it's not just about your health, but about your husband's health, what they're going to eat, and about your children's diet as well, kind of falls on you, and you can dictate a lot. So the advice I would give is load up your fruit bowl. Lots and lots of fresh fruit in the fruit bowl, lots of vegetables in your curry. Just add as much vegetables as you can. Red meat, I would probably have that once a week, once a fortnight. You don't need to be eating meat every day, which is so difficult to tell, you know, especially
Pakistani.
Pakistani.
Oh, we love our meat. They're such carnivores.
It's a difficult one, and you know, my husband's lovely, but if there's not meat or protein on his plate, he will.
Do you need to eat protein every day?
As women, actually perimenopausal women, yes, we do. Okay. So yeah, but protein doesn't always have to come from meat. It can come from eggs, it can come from tofu, it can come from beans and lentils and things like that. But also fish is a great source of protein as well. So if you are going to go down the non-veg route, I would say go for fish and then chicken breast, and then red meat last, but in that order.
Is one of the issues not that with our salads or curries, we cook vegetables for just so long that essentially they're losing their nutrients?
No, I don't think that's really a concern, because at least you're having your vegetables. Obviously, if you could have that alongside like a fresh salad, for instance, that would be ideal. But I don't think that would be a reason not to incorporate the vegetables, as long as you're getting them. It can alter the chemical composition, but I always add in a fresh. We've always got, no matter what we're eating, a fresh salad on the table.
If you were speaking to a South Asian woman right now, what's one healthcare message you'd want them to take away?
I would say, again, be selfish. And that doesn't sound like it's a healthcare message, but it is a healthcare message. You need to prioritise you. And what that looks like is make that smear test appointment, attend your mammogram screening, pay attention to what you're eating, make time for a bit of self-care, make time for exercise. And if you're eating well, sleeping well, drinking well, you've got that community connection, you're kind of 90% of the way there to good health.
Oh, brilliant. We're coming towards the final sections of the podcast, and we've got a quick fire round called That's My Cup of Tea.
Right.
So don't think too much, Dr. Farah, about the questions. Just go with your gut. What are you currently reading?
Oh, I'm reading a book called The Husbands.
Okay. Is it a good book?
It is. I'm only one chapter through, but I am enjoying it. It's about a woman who has a new husband pop up in her attic every so often. So it's really interesting. Bizarre, but interesting.
That sounds really bizarre.
Yes.
Okay. What's your go-to comfort food?
I love popcorn. I think that's a healthy alternative to crisp. But yeah, I do make great popcorn.
Do you know what I've started recently having is sweet and salted mixed popcorn?
I've always been salty. I don't like sweet popcorn. Yeah.
What's one thing every teenage girl should be taught about her health?
She needs to be taught about her menstrual cycle. She needs to be taught about fertility. She needs to be taught about menopause as well. And that needs to be on the curriculum.
If you were Prime Minister for the evening, what's one women's healthcare policy you'd implement overnight?
I would say make women's healthcare more equitable and prioritise women's healthcare, involve more women in clinical research.
And do you have a favourite quote or something that grounds you when you're going through stressful times in your life?
I do, and it comes from hadith that God will never burden you with more than you can bear. I know lots of people use that, but that really resonates with me.
I think that would resonate with a lot of people, for sure. I was about to call you Dr. Fatima there. I don't know why. Dr. Farah, this podcast is unfiltered, unapologetic and disruptive. If we take it a little bit wider than healthcare, what's one food a woman should consistently eat in her life to help her with her longer term health?
I wouldn't say one food, I would say one food group, and that is fruit and vegetables. Lots and lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. Even if they're frozen, that's fine. But yeah, fruit and veg.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farah, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A huge thank you to Dr. Farah for joining me and spilling the tea on people, power and politics. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think we speak about women's health enough, from periods to menopause? And if you could implement a women's healthcare policy overnight, where would you start? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of DemocraTEA, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics.